From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Art Barnaby will discuss the just-released information on marketing year prices for 2016 crop production, those being used to calculate the ARC and PLC program payments. Those are due out from the Farm Service Agency to you producers in the coming days. Also, K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek will look at several possible reasons why a cattle vaccine treatment may not have worked as well as anticipated for the producer, saying that usually it's not the result of product failure. He spoke on this topic at the recent K-State Beef Stucker Field Day. And later, K-State's Charlie Lee talks about a compound that may well be the long-sought repellent product effective against rodents and rabbits. All that next on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you aboard on this Tuesday. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, just a couple of days back now, announced critical information in calculating those farm program payments for 2016 crop production. Those payments are coming out very soon. It's expected anyway. And to cover what those numbers say and how they factor into the likely payment levels, we brought by, once again, Art Barnaby, Risk Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Specifically, Art, this is about the final marketing year average prices that are used to determine the agricultural risk coverage or ARC program payments and the price loss coverage payments. And what were those numbers, to get right to it?
Wheat came in at $3.89, and of course that was announced back in June, the end of June. Corn finished at $3.36. Our final estimate was a penny over that number. Soybeans came in at $9.47. We were 2 cents over. And the one we missed the greatest was sorghum. They came in at $2.79. We were 4 cents too high on that one. The point is that we were close on all those estimates, really beginning around the March 1st. They've focused in. What that allows us to do is estimate for sure the PLC payment, which makes it useful for cash flow budgeting. At least you know what it is or have a pretty good idea of what it's going to end up being. We could do the same thing for ARC if the USDA would simply announce their county yields earlier. I would point out that RMA sells crop insurance contracts that are also county triggered, and their county yields come out as early as the end of March, 1st of April. And then the SCO yields come out maybe 60 days later. So certainly you would think that there would be a way to announce those yields earlier, and it would be up to the Secretary to announce those FSA county yields.
But they're not out there yet.
No, they're not out there. In fact, they're not out there as we're talking here on the radio. I guess we won't really know until they make the payments. I'm told that the payment amounts came down to the state office today, and I think, as I understand it, they review things before they put it out to the public and start making payments. If you're farming, I wouldn't expect anything in your checking account for at least 2 weeks, but then they'll show up. And at that point, that's the first time we'll know what the FSA county yield is. 3 different agencies producing county yields, and you got 3 different results, Eric. And I can't figure any rhyme or reason. It's pretty much random, any error that you get between the different numbers. If you knew one was always 5% higher, well, you can adjust for that pretty quick and come out right.
But we do know what the PLC payment levels will be.
Yes, we do, and all you have to do is take those payment rates, for example, $1.16 for sorghum, and you would multiply that times your program yield, your FSA program yield. That's an individual farm number. That's the only number I don't have here in the equation. You multiply that times your base acres times 85%, times your crop share, and then times the sequestration cut. There's a 6.8% reduction in payment as a result of sequestration. And that will, in fact, give you the payment right down to the penny. So you have all the numbers to calculate your individual PLC payment by simply following that formula. I could do it for you if I knew your program yield, but everybody has a different program yield. But
it sounds as if, with the exception of soybeans, there will be a payment likely in the other crops case.
Absolutely. Yeah. They will be a payment on the other three crops. They will not be one on soybeans in the case of PLC. Now, ARC, we just don't know because those county yields could be different than the final estimates that we did late summer that we talked about. Obviously, we're trying to figure out how to get those numbers better and get them out there earlier, but at this point, there's a lot more error in the estimates that we put out on the farm, on the ARC program. The one possible exception in case of Kansas might be we're probably close on the wheat just because the wheat yields were so high. It pretty much eliminated all the payments west of Salina. So that one is a much easier one to estimate, but I wouldn't swear that there definitely going to be some payments probably in the eastern counties, at least some of them. So we won't know those numbers until they actually come out with a payment.
It's worth noting, you hinted at this, though, that the estimates that you had put together on these numbers were pretty darn close right down the line, weren't they?
Yeah, and that's because it's a weighted average. And, again, we published not only what each month's final price was from NASS, but we also published the final weights. As we've talked many times, we're estimating the weights, and we have a new estimate up for next year's wheat crop that we have posted in this month's Ag Manager. And those weights are all estimates, and they say estimates. But the actual numbers that NASS published, we've also put those in for corn, sorghum, and soybeans, and you can see how they're set up. And for example, if you look at the corn numbers, the weights are biggest for October, November, and January. That's been true as long as I've been doing this. So what would it take to change that? Farmers would have to change their marketing strategy. The reason they skipped December as a heavy weight, it should be obvious. That's because people want to shift income into the next tax year. So unless they change the tax system or some other factor changes, farmers are probably not going to really materially change how they're marketing their crop. How would they change that? Well, don't allow cash income accounting anymore. Force everybody into accrual. I don't expect that, so don't write me any letters on that. But that, I'm just throwing out some things that might actually cause those numbers to shift, which have been very stable for a lot of years. They are technically estimates, but they don't change a lot from year to year. And because of that, you can get really close on the numbers as far as what the final price is going to be within, somewhere around March 1st is a pretty good number. If we had the county number, we would have the number. We would know what the ARC payment is going to look like, and that would be helpful if you're a lag lender because you can use that number in your cash flow budgets coming in from your borrowers. So it would shore up some credit lines to have that to fill in, and I would argue make ARC a better risk management tool.
Yeah. Of course, your updates are posted on Ag Manager, and we remind folks to keep track of those as they are put forth. You have already calculated, you say, Art, the strike prices for next year's ARC payments. So that's out there already.
Yes, that's out there, and they're all coming down. I think this is no surprise to anyone. Corn dropped from $4.79 this year, or the 2016 crop, the one you're getting paid on now. Next year, that drops to $3.95. Sorghum dropped from $4.77 to $4.09. Soybeans dropped from $11.87 to $10.86, and wheat went down from $6.70 to $6.12. I've estimated the numbers for the following year, which would be 18-19 marketing year, meaning these are the payments that will occur in October of 2019. And you're looking at corn dropping to the floor. It'll be at $3.70. And remember, you got to take the 14% deductible off of that if you have an average yield before you start getting any payments. So we're talking about a pretty low price on corn before you're going to trigger any ARC payments with an average yield. And if it's above average, then it really makes it difficult to see how you're going to get any payments. Sorghum was estimated at $3.98, again, considerably higher than the $3.70 number from corn. And soybeans are at $9.51 and wheat at $5.66. The thing is, that's not directly comparable with the reference price used to make payments because under the PLC you get paid the difference between the reference price and the marketing year average price times your program yield. Well, here you got to take 14% off. You can either take it off the yield or you can take it off the price. But if you got an average yield, that means that price has to be 14% lower than what I just quoted you of $370. So you're talking about prices are down in the $340 range before you're going to trigger any payments for corn under ARC. So the last year, the bottom line here, there isn't a lot of price protection in there. Now, at this point, we don't know how the 2018 crop is going to come out. We don't even have that crop planted yet. It could be a total crop failure. If that should happen in your county, then there's a high probability that ARC is going to pay you. And if they have similar problems in the Corn Belt, PLC might not pay you all just because of higher prices. But if it's a real disaster, even with higher prices, there's a good chance it's still going to trigger ARC payments.
These are fluid and were designed to be so.
Absolutely. They were designed to protect you. Really what ARC was intended to do, and I think a lot of people were worried about, is if your crop failed in your county, you were more likely to get payments, at least the thought was, from that program than you would from PLC. What we didn't count on is a absolute record wheat crop that exceeded all storage space in the state of Kansas, which caused all kinds of basis problems and everything else. So, yeah.
This is all posted on the agmanager.info website, and keep abreast of the latest developments there. But once more, in closing, Art, the payments are to be issued for 16 production this month, and things are still on track for that, is your understanding?
Yes, it is, and I'm sure it'll happen.
Very good. Be watching for that news from your FSA very soon. And Art, we appreciate the brief update on this, and we will talk again undoubtedly soon. Thank you. He is a risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension. That's Art Barnaby. Once again, have a look at the article entitled USDA Announces the Final Prices and Sequestration Cuts for Determining the ARC and PLC Payments on 16 Production. That is on agmanager.info. You're listening to Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back on this Agriculture Today and into another aspect of bovine health management, drawing directly from a presentation made by our guest at the recent Beef Stocker Field Day here at Kansas State University, where he was invited to address the topic of why our common vaccines seem to fail or not live up to expectations when dealing with disease in calves. Gregg Hanzlicek is here once again. Gregg is the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at K-State. And you likely are on the receiving end of such questions from producers, Gregg, who wonder why that product did not get anything done in terms of controlling disease.
That's exactly right. We receive a lot of calls when there's some health issues, and probably logically one of the first places that people are going to go to is that our vaccines failed us. And, the vaccines that we have manufactured today are very, very good. A lot of good science, a lot of good research behind them. So that's why the title is Seems to Fail, because it's probably not the vaccine that seems to fail. It's some other issues that are going on that affect the vaccine. Its effectiveness in the field.
And we want to walk through the possibilities that you covered at the field day. And one may well be subpar administration of the product itself.
That's exactly right. A lot of our vaccines are labeled for 2 cc or 2 mLs of administration. And I know I've been guilty of it, is if we don't get the entire 2 cc subcutaneously in that animal, we're probably not providing enough vaccine to stimulate their immune system, so the coverage is going to be less than it would be if we got the whole dose in them. Things like using a disinfectant in the vaccine gun or even disinfecting our needles when we're using modified live vaccines, that's going to either kill some of the virus or bacteria or all of them. And again, we're not going to have an immune response like we normally would.
But you mentioned that most vaccines go in sub-Q, and sometimes you may, as a producer, think you've accomplished that when, in fact, there's more product on the ground than in the animal, you say.
Absolutely, and I know I've caught myself vaccinating cows or calves where it looks to me like I did a pretty good job of vaccinating the hair, but not very good of getting it in sub-Q. So it does happen, and that may help explain why it looks like some of these vaccines are not helping us.
So the message there to the producer is take extra care when injecting, basically.
Absolutely. If you're running the animals through the chute, nobody likes to really do that anyway. But if we want to make sure that these vaccines are going to help us, let's make sure that we're handling the vaccine correctly, and let's make sure that we're administrating it the way that it should be.
And you mentioned the next point that you highlighted at the field day, the handling of the product. This revolves around the temperature of the product itself and maintaining an appropriate temperature to keep that product viable, right?
Absolutely. So what we talked about at the Stalker Day was, number one, once the vaccine's mixed up, we want to make sure that those syringes are kept cool so that they're not getting heat up. They're not in the ultraviolet light, because ultraviolet light does kill the viruses. But the thing we really touched on is it starts before we mix up the vaccine. We're talking about vaccine storage. Mm-hmm. And we had a couple studies that I shared with the crowd, is that one showed that out of about 200 producer refrigerators, only about 30% of those refrigerators only kept the proper temperature of the vaccine 5% of the time. Mm-hmm. And for most vaccines, that temperature is between 35 and 45 degrees. Another study I shared with, they looked at producer, distributors like co-ops and farm stores, and then veterinary refrigerators, and they measured the temperatures over time, and they found that 76% of the time those refrigerators did not maintain those vaccines between 35 and 45 degrees. And to me, the thing that it really wasn't shocking, but it was a little bit enlightening, is that it didn't make any difference whether it was a producer's refrigerator, a distributor or a farm store or a veterinarian's refrigerator. They all miserably failed in keeping those vaccines at the proper temperature.
Well, just to drive that home further, what happens if a vaccine becomes too hot as per its effectiveness?
Well, again, it can affect both modify live and kill, but if it gets too hot, typically we're worried about what it does to those live organisms in a modified live vaccine. I mean, they have to be alive when we inject that product into the calf in order to stimulate the immune system. If they get too hot, then we do know that they'll kill the live bacteria and the live viruses that are in the vaccine. Therefore, we're injecting less. Therefore, we're going to get less of an immune response. Mm-hmm.
Killed vaccines, though, can be hampered as well by overly hot temperatures? They
can, but typically we think more of a freezing issue with killed vaccines. And when they're frozen, there's some really good research out there that shows that the adjuvant or the carrier and the organisms that are in the bottle basically become separated, and they need to be together in order to stimulate a good immune response. So producers, if they're trying to use a killed product that's frozen and they thawed out, they're probably not going to get the immune response that they normally would if it hadn't frozen in the first place.
And a frozen modified live product, once again, could be rendered ineffective.
Exactly, and there's adjuvants that are in some modified live vaccines too. So we always say producers look at the bottle to see what temperature the manufacturer recommends, but for most, it's going to be between 35 and 45 degrees during that storage period.
And one more thing on this point that you emphasize to producers about this is they should be inquiring about the storage approaches that their suppliers of vaccines are practicing. That could be the veterinarian, it could be the farm supply, so forth.
Exactly, and that's number one, is know the distributor. And if you're having product shipped to you, when it arrives, make sure that it's cold. And if it's not, then I would be sending that back and asking for something to be done, credit-wise. But even veterinarians or distributors or whatever, I would ask them, I'd ask hard questions. Are you using temperature loggers in your refrigerator, making sure that the vaccines that you're selling me are kept at this constant 35 to 45 degrees? And if they're not, then they probably should be.
Well, another thing, Greg, that you addressed at the field day, assuring that the vaccine strain is related to the illness that one is intending to treat. Explain that further, if you would.
Absolutely. There are several reasons why vaccines seem to fail, and one of them is that the strain of the organism in the vaccine is not closely related to the field strain that the calves or the cows are exposed to. We know they have to be somewhat related in order to get cross protection. And we've done some research in the diagnostic lab here at the College of Veterinary Medicine. What we did is we took calves that had never been exposed to BVD, and we vaccinated those calves, a group of them with a product A, another group product B, C, D, and then we harvested the blood and exposed their blood to 11 different BVD strains that are common in our area. And then there's a way to look at those in the laboratory to determine whether those antibodies from the vaccine actually neutralized or killed the virus. Vaccine A is what I showed them. I won't say what name it was, but it neutralized or killed 2 out of the 11 BVD strains that we exposed those antibodies to. The next product B, basically neutralized or killed 9 of the 11 strains. So that kind of shows that there is a difference in vaccines by strains that are in the field or geographical location.
Now, for this, a producer just has to enlist the help of their veterinarian to understand what strain is out there and the appropriate response, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's multiple strains, particularly of BVD, and so talking to your veterinarian, the veterinarian is going to know what vaccines work best in their area. Those are going to be the ones that they actually recommend to producers, and they're a very, very important asset to go through. We actually have some technology in the diagnostic lab here at K-State where, say a herd has a BVD issue and we can isolate BVD virus, we can compare that virus to all the vaccine strains because we've got a catalog of those, and we can help producers and veterinarians pick probably the most appropriate vaccine strain for that particular BVD strain or whatever it is in their herd.
So one can take advantage of that service, again, through their local practitioner.
Absolutely. I strongly recommend for producers that always start with their local veterinarian and then work through the problem. And if he thinks or she thinks that this technology is something you could use, then give us a holler.
Well, Gregg, one thing that seems to make perfect sense, but maybe it's overlooked, there are expiration dates on these products, and those are legit, right?
Absolutely. There's some really good research, especially on the killed vaccine side, that shows that up to the expiration date, those vaccines have been proven to be very effective. But after that time, the effectiveness starts to drop off very quickly. So I know it's hard for producers to throw away unopened bottles of a killed vaccine particularly, but if it gets to that expiration date, it's really smart to just throw those away and start with a batch of vaccine that hasn't expired.
Well, you concluded your talk with this thought that maybe we put too much stock in what vaccines can realistically accomplish. They're not a panacea for disease issues out there.
Yes, vaccine programs are extremely important, but the nutrition of that animal to make sure that their immune system is running at the top-notch place that it can, and then environmental control, stress from environment. Those 3 things together work a lot better than just concentrating on the vaccine program.
Well, this is useful information for our producers to understand the realities of vaccine performance and what affects that performance. Gregg, thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
Gregg Hanzlicek from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Kansas State University. And once more, he addressed the topic of why vaccines seem to fail at that beef stocker field day that K-State hosted here a few days back. We'll be back with more shortly here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Now to today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. The Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report for the week is, of course, out from the USDA, and for the week ending this past weekend, the topsoil moisture supplies in the state were rated at 8% surplus, 55% adequate, still 37% short to very short as of the weekend. Subsoil moisture at 1% surplus, 57% adequate, and 42% short to very short. The winter wheat crop planted 21% in the state, and emergence is at 9% now. The condition of the Kansas corn crop, 51% good to excellent, 31% fair, and 18% poor to very poor. Corn now mature at 84%, and the corn harvest is 39% complete. Soybean crop in the state, 43% good to excellent and 38% fair, now 19% poor to very poor. Soybeans dropping leaves, 78%, and harvested at 13% now. Grain sorghum condition, 58% good to excellent, 32% fair, and 10% poor to very poor. Sorghum now coloring is at 94%. Sorghum crops mature, 48%, and the grain sorghum harvest is 7% complete. And the fourth cutting of alfalfa in the state is 89% complete, according to the USDA. As for the national numbers on corn and soybean harvest progress, we turn to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey points to what he describes as a nice jump in corn reaching full maturity.
We're now at 68%, and that, despite the progress in the last several weeks, is 10 percentage points behind the 5-year average of 78%, and even more behind last year's 84% on October 1st.
He says good weather has helped speed corn maturity, but that the process was already delayed to start with.
Of course, as the crop matures late, harvest is going to come in behind schedule as producers wait for dry down in the field.
Meanwhile,
not sure of the reason, but corn condition taking a little jump upward for the week ending October 1st, now at 63% good to excellent, up 2 points, and the very poor to poor ratings at 12%, down a point.
He says the late harvest boost still doesn't bring corn close to last year's condition ratings, which were 73% good to excellent and 8% very poor to poor.
Soybeans are performing even better under this late season heat that we had most of last week. We've actually seen soybeans dropping leaves surpassing the 5-year average pace, now at 80% on October 1st, 5-year average 78%, and we've almost caught up to last year's 81%. Soybean harvest also coming along nicely, 22% nationally, 5-year average is 26%. Last year, 24%.
He says the most harvest progress this past week was in the drier eastern Corn Belt states of Illinois and Ohio.
Soybean condition, effectively steady, 60% good to excellent, 12% very poor to poor. Like corn coming in below last year.
Last year's soybean ratings were 74% good to excellent and 7% very poor to poor. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
From Capitol Hill, a bill loosening the rules for agricultural workers to come into the U.S. was introduced yesterday in Congress and will get a markup tomorrow in the House Judiciary Committee. Another bill getting a markup tomorrow would require all employers, including farmers, to participate in the federal government's E-Verify system. The Agricultural Guest Worker Act was introduced by Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte of Virginia. That act would take the Ag Guest Worker program out of the Department of Labor and move it to the USDA. The H-2A program for ag would be rebranded as the H-2C program. People now working on farms illegally would be allowed to participate in the new H-2C program and become legal agricultural workers. Workers would be allowed to stay longer at farms with flexible touchback requirements, as they call them, back to their home country. H-2C would be broadened to include forestry, dairies, food processors, and other year-round agricultural jobs when adequate domestic labor cannot be found. The Department of Labor shows 160,000 temporary H-2A ag jobs around the country were filled in the first 9 months of fiscal year 17, more than double the volume from just a few years ago. Goodlatte's bill would have an initial allocation of as many as 500,000 H-2C visas. Some farm groups expressed concern, though, that may be too low. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Now on to this week's edition of Milk Lines. Here's K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning how do we keep the cash flowing in the months going forward. As we come out of summer and we take a look at our herds, we probably have lost a few pounds of production due to heat stress. And as we move into the cooler weather of fall, we have the opportunity to see those milk production levels climb. That will help the cash flow on many of our dairies. Some other things I'd really encourage you to think about as you move forward in the next 6 to 8 months is taking a really hard look at the animals in your herd. Do you actually have the right animals in place that will help you keep that milk flow up in the coming months so that you can increase the level of cash in the checking account? What am I really talking about? I'm really talking about where we're at on reproduction. So as you look at your herd, how many animals do you have in your herd today that are at least 150 days in milk and still open, not pregnant? How many more cycles are you going to breed those animals before you say enough is enough? Also take a look at the animals that are 200 days in milk and open. Those are probably real concerns, and probably we need to be working on an exit plan to get those out of the herds and fresh heifers in. Well, you might say cash flow is tight, and how am I going to do that? Well, let's take a look at some things. If it's a good, healthy cow, she is worth something on the cull market, maybe $800 to $900. Springing heifer will cost you about $1,800 to $2,000. If you look at that difference in price, divide it by your price per milk, and let's just say it's 15 cents a pound, that's about 6,000 pounds of milk you need to gain over the next several months. I think you can see that it's probably pretty easy to make that switch and gain that milk. Again, you have to have the cash flow currently to be able to do that, but if you do, it's something you need to consider. Next thing you might want to think about is your forage quality. We have to have the right cows in place, but we also need to have the right forages, right diets in front of those animals. So please take some time to work with your nutritionist in the coming couple of months, making sure that as we bring new forages into the rations for our animals, that we're not making nutritional mistakes which may decrease milk production or hold back the performance of early lactation cows. This is Mike Brouk, encouraging our dairy farmers in Kansas to really think about how they drive milk production in the next several months in order to keep cash flow up on their dairies.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly segment on wildlife management, and along once more is Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. For years, folks have sought, you say, Charlie, a repellent for rodents and rabbits, and there may be a candidate in the works here, according to recent research, but this has been a challenge for a time, you say.
Yes, it has been. We've always struggled with dealing with small rodent problems in that many small rodent species have high reproductive rates, so populations build quite quickly, and they're generalist in their feeding behavior, so habitat modifications are not always successful in managing that density of those populations. Lethal removal is sometimes challenging, sometimes not politically acceptable, and comes with some other problems, including some risks that are associated with the use of toxicants. So we fall back to exclusion. That exclusion can be some sort of a physical barrier, some sort of a fence. You can realize that it's very difficult to fence rodents from a situation. So we rely on chemicals as a barrier, a repellent, if you will. And we've just not had an effective repellent for small mammals. And this latest research, which came from the Applied Animal Behavior Science Journal that was published last year, shows that perhaps we have one. It's a repellent that's been around for a long period of time, but not been tested on mammals.
This product has, though, been put to use against birds, you say.
Yeah, this is the product is anthraquinone. It's a naturally occurring compound that's been found to have some repellency since the early 1940s for birds. The compound is used as a bleaching agent in the production of paper. It's also used as a chemical in the production of hydrogen peroxide. But it was first registered just last year in 2016 as a bird repellent. The research on it as a bird repellent shows that it can effectively repel most of our common pest birds, Canada geese, starlings, turkeys, horned larks, also works on grackles and crows. But recently, they've started evaluating it as a mammal repellent.
How is it administered before we talk about the results of this testing?
Well, the product is sprayed and mixed onto the feed in this case. It actually changes the perception of UV light and also serves as a repellent. The USDA Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, the National Wildlife Research Center folks, tested it on 4 different mammals. The first one that they tested was for voles. Voles certainly cause a lot of damage in their tunneling for levees and structures. They also cause damage to small grains. Here in Kansas, like corn, milo, soybeans, occasionally we have problems with voles. Cottontail rabbits, as you know, cause problems in alfalfa, as well as for homeowner situations. The ground squirrels are again, a cause of concern where they tunnel into levees and consume crops that were meant for human consumption. And the deer mice is a concern in several ways, not only the consumption of small grains and the digging up of newly planted seeds, but also in the reduction of hantavirus or disease risk to humans. So the product is then mixed onto feed. This was done in a captive situation, so wild-trapped voles, ground squirrels, deer mice, and cottontail rabbits were captured in the wild, brought back into a facility where they were maintained in individual cages and went through a quarantine, a holding time frame, acclimatization, and then pre-test when the first tried to gather information on the consumption of, in this case, was oats, and then the test itself. So it was a very well planned out test just to get what sort of concentration of anthraquinone was necessary to get effective repellency.
And what did they find out about the concentration and the level of effectiveness then?
Well, the concentration varies somewhat by species, and with deer mice it took about 84% concentration, which was around 18,000 parts per million anthraquinone. For deer mice it was much less. That was about 10,000 parts per million, and that only produced a 52%. When they looked at it for the ground squirrels, that was a 56% concentration, about that 18,000 parts per million. And when they looked at it for rabbits with the tops, which was 85% repellency at about 19,000. So it appears to be dose dependent. You put more of the product on, increase the concentration, you get a higher degree of efficacy.
So, by the sound of the numbers, this compound, anthraquinone, has a good chance of being an answer, not the total answer, but an answer to the need for a repellent against rodents, against rabbits.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done. Keep in mind, many of the seeds that this product will probably eventually be placed on are grown into human food or livestock feed. So there's got to be a considerable amount of studies done there to satisfy the requirements of EPA. But I think there certainly shows promise, which is much different than many of the other repellents that have been tried for mammals.
So it may be something for the future, but for the here and now, it's back to the time-tested methods of dealing with these pests.
I would agree. It's always looking for the new next best thing. Perhaps this will be it, but it's yet to be tested, registered, and brought to the market, where the true test is when the producers get a hold of it and if they're really satisfied and does the product work as advertised. So far we don't know that, But this particular product, anthraquinone, looks promising.
It may be an avenue for control of such pests as rabbits, rodents, voles, ground squirrels. Anthraquinone, which was the subject of recent research as far as its effectiveness as a repellent. And Charlie, thanks for a look at this right here. Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. As we close out today's edition, we'd remind you that on our website now you will find a complete podcast of each and every one of our daily broadcasts, should you happen to miss one on any given day. You can also find an archive of each of the interviews and features that make up the daily broadcast. All of that is found at ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab there. Meantime, thanks for tuning in today. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.